When a cop mocked a stuttering vet in court, Stallone didn't raise his voice. He stepped between them. Welcome to Stallone Unleashed. Let's uncover what really happened. The county courthouse was a place of hushed, anxious reverence, its marble floors echoing with the quiet, hurried footsteps of lawyers, clerks, and the ordinary citizens caught in the slow, grinding gears of the justice system. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, floor wax, and a faint, almost palpable undercurrent of human desperation. Elias Thorne, a man whose life was a study in quiet observation, sat on a hard wooden bench in a crowded hallway, a silent witness to the unfolding dramas of the day. He was not here on any official business. He was a volunteer, a court-appointed advocate for those who had no one else to speak for them, a quiet, steadying presence for the bewildered, the frightened, the forgotten. In his pocket, his fingers idly traced the smooth, worn contours of a small, intricately carved wooden compass, a gift from a long-lost mentor, a man who had taught him that true north was not just a point on a map, but a moral bearing, a commitment to justice, to truth, to the fundamental dignity of every human soul. His attention was drawn to a scene unfolding near the clerk's office. An older gentleman, his clothes clean but threadbare, his face a roadmap of a life lived with hardship, stood before the counter, trying to explain a complicated issue with a summons he had received. The man's voice was low, hesitant, and he struggled with a pronounced stutter, each word a small, hard-won battle against a neurological impediment that was clearly a source of deep, lifelong frustration. He was a veteran, Elias surmised, not just from the faded military-issue jacket he wore, but from a certain disciplined stillness in his posture, a quiet endurance that was at odds with the almost unbearable vulnerability in his eyes. The clerk, a young woman with a bored, impatient expression, was clearly not listening. She tapped her pen on the counter, her gaze flicking around the hallway, her body language a symphony of dismissive indifference. Standing beside her, leaning against the counter with an air of casual, arrogant authority, was a uniformed police officer. He was young, his uniform crisp, his face set in a smirk of smug amusement as he listened to the veteran's halting, difficult speech. After a particularly long, stuttered pause from the veteran, the officer let out a short, derisive chuckle. "Come on, Pop," the officer said, his voice loud, cutting through the hallway's hushed atmosphere. "Spit it out. We ain't got all day. Some of us have actual police work to do." The veteran flinched as if struck. His face flushed a deep, painful crimson, his eyes dropping to the floor, his stutter, which had been a struggle, now becoming a complete, insurmountable wall of silence. He stood there, his shoulders slumped, his hands trembling, a figure of profound, public humiliation. The clerk snickered. A few other people in the crowded hallway looked away, their expressions a mixture of discomfort and a quiet, cowardly relief that they were not the target of the officer's casual cruelty. Elias watched, a familiar, cold anger rising in his chest. He had seen this before, this abuse of power, this mockery of a man's vulnerability, this utter, absolute failure of basic human decency. The wooden compass in his pocket felt heavy, its needle spinning wildly in the face of such a profound moral deviation. He knew, with a certainty that was as solid and unyielding as the marble floors beneath his feet, that he could not remain a silent witness. This was not just about a man with a stutter. It was about respect. It was about honor. It was about the sacred duty of those in positions of power to protect, not to prey upon, the vulnerable. He rose slowly from his bench, his movements deliberate, his gaze the color of a gathering storm, fixed on the smirking, uniformed figure at the clerk's counter. Elias didn't hurry. He moved through the crowded hallway with a quiet, purposeful grace, his presence a subtle, yet undeniable, shift in the room's tense, uncomfortable atmosphere. The young officer, whose name tag read Miller, was still smirking, clearly pleased with his own wit, with the small, cruel display of power he had just performed. The clerk was still giggling, a sound that was as ugly as it was inappropriate in the hallowed, somber halls of justice. The veteran, whose name Elias would later learn was Arthur, remained frozen, his head bowed, his hands clenched in a tight, white-knuckled fist at his sides, a silent, trembling monument to a dignity that had just been brutally, publicly assaulted. Elias stopped a few feet away from the counter, his gaze fixed not on the clerk, but on Officer Miller. "Officer," Elias said, his voice low, calm, yet carrying an authority that made Miller's smirk falter, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of surprise and a dawning, defensive annoyance. "I believe this gentleman," Elias continued, gesturing towards Arthur with a quiet, respectful nod, "was trying to ask a question. And I believe it is your duty, as a public servant, to listen, patiently, and with respect." Miller's face flushed, his earlier amusement quickly curdling into a belligerent anger. "Now, who the hell are you?" he sneered, his hand instinctively dropping to the butt of his service weapon, a classic, if juvenile, gesture of intimidation. "This is official police business. It doesn't concern you." "On the contrary, officer," Elias replied, his voice still calm but now edged with a cold, hard steel. "It concerns me a great deal. It concerns me when I see a man, a citizen, a veteran who has served his country, being treated with such contemptible disrespect. It concerns me when I see a uniform, a symbol of protection and service, being used as a tool of mockery and humiliation." The other people in the hallway, who had earlier averted their gazes, were now watching, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and a quiet, hopeful support. They sensed that a confrontation, a reckoning, was at hand. "He was taking forever," Miller protested, his voice rising, defensive. "He can barely get a word out. We have procedures, protocols. We can't spend all day waiting for him to stutter his way through a simple question." His stutter, "Officer," Elias said, his voice dropping, becoming a quiet, dangerous whisper, "is not a choice. It is a wound. A wound, I suspect, that may have been earned in the very service you seem to hold in such low regard. A wound that deserves our compassion, our patience, not our ridicule." He then took a step closer, his quiet, unassuming presence seeming to diminish the officer's physical, uniformed authority. "You speak of police work," Elias continued, his gaze unwavering. "Let me tell you something about real work, officer. The work of a soldier. The work of a man who faces fear, who endures hardship, who carries the weight of his experiences, both seen and unseen, for the rest of his life. That is hard work. And the men who do it, the men like Arthur here, they have earned a lifetime of our respect. A respect you so casually, so cruelly withheld." He then did something that seemed to stun Miller into silence. He stepped between the officer and Arthur, his own body a quiet, unassuming, yet utterly impassable shield. He turned his back on Miller and faced Arthur, his expression one of profound, gentle empathy. "Arthur," he said softly, ignoring the fuming, impotent officer behind him, "my name is Elias Thorne, and I would be honored to help you with your question. Please take your time. I have all day." The quiet, simple act of defiance, of choosing to stand with the vulnerable rather than to confront the aggressor directly, was a masterstroke of moral and psychological strategy. It rendered Miller's authority, his uniform, his weapon, utterly irrelevant. It shifted the power dynamic of the entire room, from one of intimidation and fear to one of quiet, unwavering, human decency. The hallway, which had been a stage for Officer Miller's casual cruelty, was now a silent, captivated theater for Elias's quiet act of principled defiance. Miller stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and a dawning, impotent rage. He had been dismissed, rendered irrelevant, not by a physical challenge, but by a moral one, a force he was clearly unequipped to comprehend, let alone to counter. The clerk, her earlier amusement now replaced by a nervous, wide-eyed apprehension, suddenly found a stack of papers on her desk that required her immediate, intense concentration. Arthur looked up at Elias, his eyes, which had been filled with a profound, humiliated shame, now holding a flicker of something else, a fragile, dawning hope, a disbelief that anyone, let alone a stranger, would so publicly, so unequivocally stand with him for him. I Arthur stammered, his voice still a little shaky, but with a new, less frantic rhythm. I don't understand this summons. It says I missed a court date, but I never got the first notice. Elias listened patiently, his gaze gentle, encouraging. He didn't rush him, didn't try to finish his sentences for him. He simply offered him the gift of time, of a quiet, unjudging space in which to find his words. I see, Elias said, when Arthur had finished. May I look at the summons? Arthur handed him the paper, his hand still trembling slightly. Elias scanned the document, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was not a lawyer, but he was a man of letters, a man who understood the often convoluted language of bureaucracy, the ways in which a simple, clerical error could create a cascade of devastating consequences for the unwary. It seems, Elias said after a moment, that there has been a mistake. The original notice appears to have been sent to an old address, a shelter you haven't resided at for some time. This is a simple administrative error, Arthur, one that could be easily rectified. He then turned to the clerk, who looked up, startled, from her intense study of her paperwork. Excuse me, miss, Elias said, his voice polite but firm. It appears there has been a clerical error regarding Mr. Hemlock's summons. The initial notice was sent to an incorrect address. We will need to file a motion to vacate the default judgment and reschedule the court date. The clerk, clearly intimidated by Elias's quiet authority, and perhaps by the lingering, unspoken disapproval of the onlookers in the hallway, could only manage a flustered, "Yes, sir. Of course, sir. I'll get you the forms." Officer Miller, who had been standing by, a silent, fuming monument to his own irrelevance, finally seemed to find his voice. "Now, hold on a minute," he blustered, trying to reassert his authority. You're not his lawyer. You have no right to interfere in a legal matter." Elias turned to him, his gaze cold, dismissive. "I'm not his lawyer, officer," he said. "I am his advocate. I am a citizen, witnessing what appears to be a miscarriage of justice, and offering my assistance to a fellow citizen, a veteran, who is being treated with a profound lack of respect by an officer of the law who has clearly forgotten his oath to serve and to protect all members of the community, not just the ones who speak without a stutter." He then turned his back on Miller once more, a final, unequivocal dismissal. He placed a gentle, reassuring hand on Arthur's arm. "Don't you worry, Arthur," he said softly. "We will sort this out together." The quiet, unassuming historian had, in the space of a few short minutes, become a formidable champion for the voiceless, his quiet, principled stand a powerful rebuke to the casual arrogance of a system, and a man that had so carelessly, so cruelly, forgotten its own humanity. The transformation in the courthouse hallway was palpable. The earlier atmosphere of tense, uncomfortable silence had been replaced by a low, supportive murmur. Several other people who had been waiting in line, witnessing the entire exchange, now offered Arthur quiet words of encouragement, of solidarity. An older woman, her face kind and compassionate, even offered him her place in the queue. Officer Miller, his face a mask of sullen, impotent fury, seemed to realize he had lost all authority, all credibility. He muttered something under his breath, then turned and strode away, his retreat a tacit admission of his own profound public failure. The clerk, her earlier dismissiveness now replaced by a flustered, almost fearful, efficiency, quickly produced the necessary forms for Elias and Arthur. She even offered them the use of a small, private office to fill them out, an offer Elias graciously accepted. In the quiet of the small office, away from the prying eyes of the crowded hallway, Arthur seemed to relax for the first time. The deep, painful flush of his earlier humiliation began to recede, replaced by a look of profound, almost overwhelming gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Thorne," he stammered, his stutter less pronounced now in the calm, safe space Elias had created for him. No one has ever stood up for me like that before. Everyone deserves to have someone stand up for them. Arthur, Elias replied gently, as he helped the older man to fill out the complicated legal forms. Especially those who have stood up for all of us. He worked with Arthur for the better part of an hour. His patience, his clarity, his quiet, unwavering support, a powerful antidote to the confusion and despair that had so clearly been overwhelming the old soldier. He helped Arthur to articulate his situation, to navigate the convoluted language of the legal system, to reclaim a sense of agency, of control over his own life. As they worked, Arthur began to open up, to share a little of his story. He spoke of his service, of the camaraderie, of the loss. He spoke of his struggles after returning home, of the invisible wounds that had made it so difficult to hold down a job, to maintain relationships, to find a place in a world that no longer seemed to have a place for him. And he spoke, his voice thick with a profound, enduring grief of his son, Michael, a boy he had lost not to war, but to a tragic accident, a loss that had been the final, devastating blow to his already fragile spirit. Elias listened, his heart aching with a deep, empathetic sorrow. He recognized in Arthur's story the familiar, tragic narrative of so many veterans, so many quiet heroes, whose sacrifices were so often forgotten, whose struggles so often went unseen, unheard. When the forms were finally completed, Elias walked with Arthur back to the clerk's counter. The clerk, her demeanor now one of almost reverential respect, accepted the forms and assured them that the matter would be dealt with promptly, that a new court date would be set, that the default judgment would be vacated. As they were leaving the courthouse, stepping out into the bright, cold light of the afternoon, Arthur stopped. He turned to Elias, his faded blue eyes shining with unshed tears. "Elias," he said, his voice a hoarse, emotional whisper, "you didn't just help me with this summons today. You gave me back a piece of my dignity, a piece I thought I had lost forever." He then reached into his pocket and took out a small, worn, and intricately carved wooden bird. It was a knot-winger, its form delicate yet resilient. I made this," he said, pressing it into Elias's hand. "It's not much, but I want you to have it, as a reminder of a kindness that I will never, ever forget." Elias held the small wooden bird, its smooth, warm surface a testament to Arthur's hidden artistry, his enduring spirit. He was deeply, profoundly moved. "Thank you, Arthur," he said, his own voice a little unsteady. "I will treasure it always." The two men, the quiet historian and the forgotten soldier, stood for a moment on the steps of the courthouse, two solitary souls who had found, in the most unlikely of circumstances, a moment of profound, healing human connection. The days that followed the encounter at the courthouse were a period of quiet, yet significant, change for both Elias and Arthur. Elias, true to his word, continued to serve as Arthur's advocate, not just in his legal matters, but in the larger, more complex navigation of the bureaucratic systems that had for so long seemed designed to defeat him. He helped Arthur to connect with a local veteran support group, a community of men and women who understood his struggles, who spoke his language, who could offer a kind of camaraderie he had not known since his days in the service. He also helped Arthur to find a small, clean, and safe room in a transitional housing facility for veterans, a place where he could finally find a measure of stability, of peace, of a simple, fundamental security that had been denied him for so long. Arthur, for his part, began to slowly, cautiously, emerge from the shell of his long-held despair. The quiet, unwavering support of Elias and the newfound community of his fellow veterans seemed to be a powerful medicine for his wounded spirit. His stutter, though still present, became less pronounced, his voice gaining a new, quiet confidence. The haunted, weary look in his eyes began to be replaced by a flicker of something else, something that looked almost like hope. He began to carve again, his gnarled, arthritic hands rediscovering their long-lost skill, their innate artistry. He carved small, beautiful wooden birds, each one a testament to his resilient, creative spirit. He gave them as gifts to the other veterans at the center, to the social workers, to the volunteers, small, simple tokens of a gratitude too profound for words. Elias would often visit Arthur at the center, the two of them sitting for hours in the common room, sharing stories, memories, and long, comfortable silences. Elias learned more about Arthur's life, about his son, Michael, about the quiet, everyday heroism of a life lived with integrity, with love, even in the face of unimaginable loss. And Arthur, in turn, learned about Elias, about his books, about his quiet, solitary quest to honor the forgotten narratives of the past, about his own profound, personal connection to the enduring legacy of service and sacrifice. One afternoon, as they were sitting together, Arthur turned to Elias, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, Elias," he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound, "that cop, that young fella at the courthouse. I almost feel sorry for him." Elias looked at him, surprised. "Sorry for him, Arthur? After the way he treated you?" "Yeah," Arthur said, a faint, sad smile on his lips. "Because he doesn't know. He doesn't understand. He lives in a world of black and white, of rules and regulations. He doesn't see the gray. He doesn't see the stories. He doesn't see the heart of things. And that," he added, his gaze profound, "is a poorer way to live, isn't it?" Elias was silent for a long moment, struck by the simple, profound wisdom of Arthur's words. Here was a man who had every reason to be bitter, to be angry, yet he had found, in the depths of his own suffering, a capacity for a deep, empathetic compassion, even for his own tormentor. "Yes, Arthur," Elias finally said, his voice filled with a deep, humble respect. "Yes, it is." The wooden compass in Elias's pocket felt like a quiet affirmation. Arthur, the forgotten soldier, the man with the stutter, had, in his own quiet, unassuming way, found his own true north. And it was a bearing of profound, unwavering, and beautifully, redemptively human grace. The story of what happened at the courthouse and the subsequent quiet transformation of Arthur Hemlock's life became another of the quiet, resonant narratives that Elias Thorne carried in his heart. It was a powerful testament to the idea that a single, principled act of intervention, a simple refusal to accept injustice, could indeed create ripples of positive, healing change. He often thought of Officer Miller, the young, arrogant cop whose casual cruelty had been the catalyst for it all. He learned, through the courthouse grapevine, that Miller had been required to attend a series of mandatory sensitivity training sessions and had been placed on a probationary period, his conduct closely monitored. Elias hoped, with a quiet, sincere charity, that the young man had learned something from the experience, that the encounter with Arthur's quiet dignity and Elias's unwavering moral conviction had planted a seed of doubt in his own arrogant, black-and-white worldview, a seed that might, one day, blossom into a more compassionate, more human understanding. But his primary thoughts were with Arthur. He watched, with a quiet, profound satisfaction, as the old soldier continued to heal, to grow, to reclaim his life. Arthur became a beloved, respected figure at the Veterans Center, his quiet wisdom and his gentle, artistic spirit a source of comfort and inspiration to many. His small, carved wooden birds became a symbol of hope, of resilience, of the enduring power of a human spirit to create beauty even in the midst of brokenness. One day, a small article appeared in the local newspaper. It was a human interest story about the Veterans Center, and it featured a large, beautifully rendered photograph of Arthur, sitting at his small workbench, a half-finished wooden bird in his hand, his face, though still etched with the lines of a hard life, now illuminated by a quiet, serene peace. The article told a small, edited version of his story, of his service, of his struggles, of his rediscovery of his art, of his new, profound sense of purpose in helping his fellow veterans. It spoke of the quiet heroism of a life that had refused to be defeated by sorrow, by neglect, by the indifference of the world. Elias read the article, a slow, warm smile spreading across his face. He cut it out and placed it carefully in his journal, a tangible testament to a story that had found its voice, a life that had found its way back into the light. He knew that Arthur's journey was not over. The echoes of the past would always be with him, but they were no longer the haunting, tormenting ghosts of his solitary nights. They were now a part of a larger, richer, more compassionate narrative, a story of loss, yes, but also of love, of resilience, of a profound, hard-won, and beautifully, redemptively human grace. The wooden compass on Elias's desk seemed to gleam a little brighter, its needle pointing steadfastly towards the true north of a life lived with purpose, with integrity, and with an unwavering belief in the quiet, often unseen, but ultimately triumphant dignity of the human soul. The seasons turned, bringing with them the inevitable, cyclical rhythms of change, of loss, of renewal. Elias Thorne, in the quiet autumn of his own life, continued his work, his solitary rambles, his chronicling of the forgotten narratives of human courage and resilience. The story of Arthur Hemlock remained a quiet, powerful touchstone for him, a constant reminder of the profound impact that a single, empathetic act could have on a human life. He and Arthur remained close friends, their bond forged in the crucible of shared, righteous anger, and tempered by a deep, mutual respect. They would meet for coffee, for quiet walks in the park, their conversations a comfortable, easy flow of shared stories, of quiet reflections, of a wisdom born of long and often difficult lives. Arthur, with the stability and support he had found, continued to flourish. His woodworking became more than just a hobby. It became a small, thriving enterprise, his beautifully carved birds and other small sculptures sought after by local art lovers and collectors. He donated a portion of his earnings to the Veterans Center, a quiet, tangible way of giving back to the community that had given him a new lease on life. He even, with Elias's gentle encouragement, began to write down his own story, his own memories, his own reflections, filling a series of simple, spiral-bound notebooks with his neat, careful script. It was a difficult, often painful process, but also a profoundly healing one. He was reclaiming his own narrative, giving voice to the long, silent years of his own quiet, heroic struggle. One day, a small, unassuming package arrived for Elias in the mail. Inside was a single, exquisitely carved wooden compass, a perfect replica of the one his mentor had given him so many years ago. It was Arthur's work, his craftsmanship now refined, confident, imbued with a new, serene artistry. There was a short, simple note attached. "For my friend, Elias," it read, "who showed me the way when I was lost, who reminded me of my own true north. With deepest gratitude, always, Arthur." Elias held the compass in his hand, its smooth, warm wood a testament to a friendship that had been one of the great, unexpected gifts of his later life. He was deeply, profoundly moved. He placed it on his desk, next to the bronze star, the silver dollar, the miniature boxing gloves, the other small, sacred talismans of his life's journey. They were a collection of stories, of connections, of quiet, human miracles. He knew that his own time was growing shorter, that his own story was nearing its final chapter. But he felt a deep, abiding sense of peace. He had lived his life in accordance with the principles he held most dear. He had tried, in his own quiet, unassuming way, to be a force for good in a world that was often harsh, often indifferent. He had listened to the stories of the forgotten, had championed the dignity of the overlooked, had borne witness to the quiet, resilient, and often heartbreaking beauty of the human spirit. And that, he knew, was a legacy worth leaving. A legacy not of monuments or of wealth, but of small, quiet acts of kindness, of a life lived with integrity, with empathy, with an unwavering belief in the profound, redemptive power of human connection. The compass in his hand felt like a final, perfect, and beautiful affirmation. The legacy of Elias Thorne, much like the man himself, was a quiet, unassuming thing, not etched in grand monuments or celebrated in public pronouncements, but woven into the fabric of the lives he had touched, the stories he had honored, the small, yet significant, changes he had helped to bring about. The Veterans Center, where Arthur Hemlock had found a new life, a new purpose continued to thrive, its culture of mutual support and respect a testament to the quiet revolution that had begun with a single, empathetic act in a sterile waiting room. The library, under the now much wiser, much more compassionate guidance of Mrs. Gable, had become a true community hub, a place of welcome and sanctuary for all, regardless of their circumstances. And in the quiet corners of the city, in the hearts of the people whose lives had intersected with his memory endured. A young woman, once on the verge of abandoning her passion, now ran a thriving, community-focused boxing gym, a place where strength was measured not in knockouts, but in character. A young girl, once crushed by the indifference of the world, now a confident, compassionate young scientist, carried an old, stilled pocket watch as a reminder of the enduring value of quiet, thoughtful innovation. A formerly arrogant teenager, now a thoughtful young man, dedicated his time to honoring the stories of the very people he had once so carelessly mocked. These were the ripples, the echoes of Elias Thorne's quiet, principled life. He had been a man who understood that true power lay not in a loud voice, but in a listening heart, not in a show of force, but in a gesture of empathy, not in the grand, sweeping narratives of history, but in the small, sacred, and often overlooked stories of individual human lives. The talismans he had collected, the bronze star, the river stone, the miniature boxing gloves, the stilled watch, the 2 wooden compasses, were all just objects. But the values they represented, courage, endurance, integrity, patience, and a true, unwavering moral bearing. These are the things that truly mattered, the things that had guided his every action, his every quiet intervention. He had been a historian, yes, but he had also been a healer, a mentor, a quiet champion for the forgotten, the dismissed, the heartbroken. He had lived his life as a testament to the belief that every story deserves to be heard, every sorrow deserves to be honored, and every human being deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And in the end, that perhaps is the greatest, most enduring, and most heroic story of all. The quiet, unassuming man in the worn tweed jacket had left an indelible mark on the world, not by changing its course in some grand, dramatic fashion, but by gently, patiently, and persistently reminding it of its own better, more compassionate, and more human heart. The final chapter of Elias Thorne's own story was, like the man himself, a quiet, unassuming affair. He passed away peacefully in his sleep one cool autumn night, his small, book-lined room filled with the gentle, rustling sound of the wind in the trees outside his window. His funeral was a small, simple gathering, attended not by dignitaries or public figures, but by the quiet, ordinary people whose lives he had touched in his own extraordinary way. Arthur Hemlock was there, his back straight, his eyes clear, a quiet, profound sorrow in his gaze, but also a deep, abiding gratitude. He placed a single, exquisitely carved wooden knot-winger bird on Elias's casket, a final, silent tribute to the friend who had given him back his life, his dignity, his song. Maria, the young boxer, was there, her quiet strength a testament to the lesson she had learned from the unassuming man who had seen the champion within her. Lily, the young inventor, was there, the old, stilled pocket watch a quiet, constant reminder of the man who had taught her to value her own unique, quiet brilliance. And Kevin, Jessica, and Mark were there, the 3 teenagers who had been so profoundly changed by a lesson in respect in a snowy park, their presence a quiet, solemn acknowledgement of the man who had shown them a different, better way to be. There were no grand eulogies, no flowery speeches. Just a few, simple, heartfelt stories shared by those who had known him, who had been touched by his quiet wisdom, his unwavering empathy, his profound, unassuming grace. They spoke of a man who listened more than he spoke, who saw more than he showed, who understood that the greatest strength was often the quietest, the most profound truths often unspoken. After the service, as the small group of mourners began to disperse, Arthur approached Maria, a woman he had never met, but whose story he felt he knew through the shared connection of their quiet, unassuming mentor. He was a good man, Arthur said, his voice a low, gravelly sound. The best, Maria replied, her own voice thick with emotion. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, two souls from different worlds, different generations, united by their shared love and respect for the man who had, in his own unique way, changed both of their lives. The legacy of Elias Thorne, they both knew, would not be found in any history book. It would be found in the quiet, ongoing stories of the lives he had touched, in the ripples of compassion and understanding that would continue to spread outwards from his own small, principled, and profoundly, beautifully human life. The quiet historian had become a part of the very narrative he had so cherished, a silent, enduring echo of courage in a world that so desperately needed to hear it. The quiet, book-lined apartment of Elias Thorne was eventually cleared out, its contents dispersed, its stories scattered to the winds. But the objects that had sat on his desk, the small, sacred talismans of his life's journey, found their way to a new, fitting home. Arthur Hemlock, in his role as a respected elder at the Veterans Center, created a small, quiet memorial corner, a place of reflection and remembrance. In a simple glass case, he placed the tarnished bronze star, the old silver dollar, the miniature boxing gloves, the stilled pocket watch, and the two carved wooden compasses. Beside the case, he mounted a small, simple plaque. It read, "In memory of Elias Thorne, historian of the human heart. He taught us to listen for the quiet stories, to honor the unseen courage, and to always, always choose compassion." The memorial became a quiet, beloved fixture at the center, a place where veterans would often sit, in silent contemplation, drawing a measure of strength, of hope, from the simple, powerful symbols of a life lived with such profound integrity. The story of Elias, and of the people whose lives he had touched, became a part of the center's own oral history, a testament to the enduring power of a single, principled individual to effect real, meaningful change. And so, the ripples continue to spread. The Hemlock Initiative continued to transform the way the VA clinic cared for its patients. The community ring, boxing gym continued to be a haven of respect and support for the city's youth. The Veterans Voices archive at the library continued to grow, its collection of stories a powerful, moving testament to the human cost of conflict. And in quiet corners all over the city, in the hearts of a young scientist, a compassionate boxer, a group of thoughtful teenagers, and a community of resilient veterans, the quiet, unassuming spirit of Elias Thorne lived on. He had been a man who had understood that the true work of a historian was not just to record the past, but to illuminate its lessons for the present, to use the stories of yesterday to build a better, more compassionate, more human tomorrow. He had been a quiet warrior, a gentle teacher, a steadfast friend. And his story, like all the best stories, did not truly end. It simply became a part of a larger, more beautiful, and eternal human narrative, a quiet, enduring echo of a life lived with profound, unwavering, and deeply, redemptively loving grace.